The idea of priesthood is very important in Mormonism, which they define as the authority to act in God's name on the earth. Now, Mormons believe that only they have any real priesthood, and only they and no one else has any authority to act for God, to perform needed ordinances, to give blessings, and things like that. So, when you're coming out of Mormonism, you may wonder, what about priesthood? Does my new church actually have priesthood? Do they really have the authority to act for God? And how does all that work? And that's what I wanted to explore today to help make sense out of this for you on your faith journey. Now, let's remember what the LDS Church actually teaches about priesthood. To possess the priesthood, you have to be a male. And there are two different classes of priesthood in Mormonism. The lower priesthood is called the Aaronic priesthood, and the higher is the Melchizedek priesthood. The lesser priesthood, the Aaronic priesthood, has to be bestowed on a person first before they can receive the Melchizedek priesthood, and it has to be bestowed by somebody who has the priesthood handed down to them. So the Aaronic priesthood is given to boys when they reach age 12. It's also given to adult men when they first become members of the LDS Church. And there are 3 different offices. Each one has its own set of duties. First, a boy becomes a deacon, then a teacher, and finally a priest. And so then at adulthood, someone with the Aaronic priesthood can receive the higher Melchizedek priesthood. And often this occurs when a young man goes on a mission for the church. So in the local congregation, there are 2 offices of the Melchizedek priesthood. There's the high priest and the elder. Now these titles reflect biblical words. Aaron was a priest in the Old Testament, and so was Melchizedek. And so beyond this superficial similarity of similar words, how does the LDS priesthood structure and concept compare with the Bible? Well, first of all, the Bible teaches that the priesthood held by Aaron and by the Old Testament priests is actually no longer in force. Because unlike the LDS concept, the priests of the Old Testament had as their main function the maintenance of worship at Israel's temple. And that mainly consisted of offering sacrifices to God to cover people's sins. So in the Old Testament then, to approach God, you had to bring a sacrifice. You brought it through the high priest and through the priestly order. And the high priest then had the authority to go before you to offer your sacrifice to God. Well, since Jesus offered himself as one complete and final sacrifice, there's no more sacrifices that are needed. And so the entire ritual structure of the whole Old Testament is now obsolete. It's been fulfilled in the person of Jesus, who is both the sacrifice and the high priest who brings the sacrifice to God. So Jesus is the only high priest that we ever need. This becomes clear in Hebrews chapter 7, verses 23 through 25. It says, "There were many priests under the old system, for death prevented them from remaining in office. But because Jesus lives forever, his priesthood lasts forever. Therefore, he is able once and forever to save those who come to God through him. He lives forever to intercede with God on their behalf." So that talks about Jesus as a high priest. His priesthood, it says, is permanent, and he's able to completely save us because he has the ultimate priesthood. Then he's able to totally intercede for us before God, our Father, in just the way that the priests in the past would have done so for the people of Israel. But in even a greater way, of course, because he has this permanent priesthood. Now, secondly, only one person holds the unique priesthood of Melchizedek. Now, Melchizedek is mentioned in Genesis chapter 14. He's a priestly character who was approached by Abraham, but this is long before God revealed the whole sacrificial system of Israel's temple. Now, we know very little about Melchizedek, but like the priests of the temple, Melchizedek is also mentioned in Hebrews chapter 7 in verses 15 through 17. It says, "A different priest who is like Melchizedek has appeared. Jesus became a priest not by meeting the physical requirement of belonging to the tribe of Levi, but by the power of a life that cannot be destroyed. And the psalmist pointed out when he prophesied, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." Now that's a quote from Psalm 110. It's quoted there in Hebrews chapter 7. And that applies to Jesus. So look at what Hebrews says is the qualification that marks a Melchizedek type priest. To be part of the temple priesthood, you had to be descended from the tribe of Levi. But Jesus became a greater priest than that, even though he was not even descended from the tribe of Levi. He was from the tribe of Judah. He says, by the power of a life that cannot be destroyed, it says in Hebrews. So if anyone claims Melchizedek priesthood, they need to be immortal. They need to have an indestructible life, or they don't qualify for that priesthood. And so the Bible teaches that Jesus is our only high priest. But the Bible also teaches that everyone who belongs to him is also a priest. And we see that in 1 Peter chapter 2, in verse 5. He says, "You are living stones that God is building into his spiritual temple. And what's more, you are his holy priests. Through the mediation of Jesus Christ, you offer spiritual sacrifices that please God." And so he says there's two metaphors here. One is you're like the temple. When you put all the people who follow Jesus together, we are like a new temple. The old temple is demolished. But he says that we're also able to go to God. We're priests of God, to offer not animal sacrifices, but it says to offer spiritual sacrifices. And that would be things like worship and surrender, obedience, adoration to God. Now, there's no distinction between men and women, unlike the Mormon priesthood. And in the Bible, there's no distinction between people of different races, like Jews and Gentiles. But every one of us can have direct access to God through the mediation, it says, of Jesus Christ. In other words, you don't have to go through some kind of worthiness interview to be approved for priesthood like you did if you're a guy like you did in Mormonism. But he says you can come boldly, directly to God's presence because of Jesus' sacrifice when he took our sins upon himself. Now, I hope this is an encouragement to you today. While only Jesus has the authority to act as a high priest before God, we don't need a whole high priestly hierarchy, yet you and I, as followers of Jesus, are also priests. Thanks for watching today.